I've been hung up on Allison Argent. Teen Wolf was a pretty good show and had a few truly standout characters. Characters with real complexity. They were deep. Stiles was deep. Marin Morell was deep. Derek was deep. Malia was deep. Allison was deep. This video is primarily concerned with Allison's arc during the first 3 seasons of the MTV show. Of skeletons and cobwebs, of full moons and silver arrowheads. It's time to analyze Allison Argent. It took some time for me to warm up to Allison. To be honest, the first season of Teen Wolf was kind of a difficult watch. But by the time Bianca Lawson would show up in season 2, the show immediately got a lot more sophisticated, and showrunner Jeff Davis had some of my respect. I've already made an analysis video about Bianca Lawson's performance in Teen Wolf. I personally think it's the best analysis video I've ever done. I've spent a long time analyzing teen films and teen shows, and that video felt like a culmination of years of intense study. Please watch it if what I have to say is interesting to you. Season 2 and Season 3 Teen Wolf had some pretty spectacular stuff. I finally started paying a lot more attention to Allison when they separated her from Scott. What ends up happening a lot in teen shows is that some characters can be held back by a relationship that the narrative is determined to keep them in. I guess that's true of real life too. I spent my entire 20s in a relationship that should have ended while I was still in high school, but stubbornly, I stayed in it and missed out on a lot of personal growth and development. Well, the same can be said of fictional characters in teen shows. We can all find ourselves trapped in the arrested development of romantic sentimentality, stuck in a relationship that isn't helping us move the plot along or getting us closer to completing a personal character arc. I liked Allison and Scott as a couple, I guess, but I definitely felt that the relationship was doing a lot more for Scott as a character than for Allison. Breaking them up was a wonderful choice and gave Allison a chance to become extremely sophisticated in her own right. Actress Crystal Reed was great as Allison. I ended up enjoying her performance a lot and appreciating many of the decisions she made. The werewolf metaphor is a pretty fascinating one. I feel it works best within coming-of-age stories. The werewolf metaphor is typically masculine, expressing the transformative experiences of young men as they go through puberty when they feel equal parts abomination and superpowered. The werewolf metaphor doesn't traditionally have a lot to say about young women, but Teen Wolf does. Coming of age is all about transformation. Maturity is essentially adolescence transformed. While young men are transformed into monsters in Teen Wolf, unpredictable, rage-filled, and domineering, Teen Wolf used Allison Argent as a way to express how young women can be transformed into a weapon, calculating, lethal, and loyal. Allison's metaphor was done beautifully. The teenage experience for Allison Argent was all about weaponization. Her journey through adolescence became militarized by her traumatic experiences, by her family's bloody legacy, and by the narrative of Teen Wolf itself. In Season 3, once Allison was freed from her romantic narrative with Scott, she became fully weaponized. She ultimately transformed, meaning she reached true maturity faster than Scott or any of the other teen characters did. She also died at the end of the season, as there was little more her character could experience. She completed her arc. The arc. She accomplished the natural goal of teenage television characters. She reached maturity. She went through the grueling exercises of youth and completed every rite of passage, including sacrifice. Allison died a completed character, a hero's death. It was the ultimate tragedy. She was cut down when she was protecting Isaac, a boy she'd recently developed romantic feelings for, only to die in the arms of Scott, her first love. What I found most compelling about Allison was how she emotionally benefited from being transformed into a total badass. The show used horror motifs and concepts not to truly disturb the viewer, but to ultimately inspire them. Scott's transformation into a monster is turned on its head after he starts to emotionally and physically benefit from it. Transformation isn't a choice when you're growing up. Maturity is inevitable. Coming of age transforms everyone. You can only battle being transformed by your youth for so long until you eventually accept it. You're transformed whether you want to be or not. It's what you do with how you've been transformed that matters. Allison was transformed into a fine-tuned weapon, where the teenage werewolves were transformed by an unexpected attack. The other teenage characters, and primarily the women, were transformed by trauma. Trauma overflowing, trauma collected, trauma over trauma. This is how the show can be so brilliant in a very postmodern sense. The trauma felt by characters like Allison and Lydia was truly episodic. It mirrored the narrative systems of the show itself. They were both transformed by a series of traumatic events. Literally, an entire series of them, seasons worth of trauma. It's one of the few times teen shows have accounted for the amount of trauma contained within them and inflicted on the characters it features. Allison and Lydia processed the trauma of being teenage girls differently. Allison took her father's lead, how he processed his own trauma, and learned how to hunt. A part of it was absolutely about devotion to her family, but I think a large facet of her transformation into a badass hunter that goes overlooked is in its practicality. Young women can feel targeted and stalked. They can feel extremely unsafe. Her father wasn't simply teaching her how to hunt. He was teaching her how to protect herself and how to strategize. It's interesting to compare Chris Argent and Derek Hale, two male mentors for the two main leads of the show's first 3 seasons. The lessons Derek tries to impart to Scott can diverge intensely from the lessons Chris teaches Allison. The werewolves seem primarily patriarchal, while the hunters claim to be matriarchal. When Allison's mother died, the trauma of being a teenager in the ultramodern world was too much for her. She stopped resisting the transformative power of teen angst. It resulted in her shutting down emotionally as she seemed to pursue her place as the female head of her family. So, thank God for Isaac. I loved that character. He was a damaged kid from an abusive home. He was hypersensitive and he was in love with Allison. Isaac experienced a lot of trauma. From Dawson Leary's dad, by the way. What the fuck? That was crazy. And since I'm going off script, just to say that, it's great seeing Allison's dad here. He was in 13 Ghosts, so it's one of my favorite movies growing up. So it's great seeing these two actors in this, but it really fucked me up seeing fucking Mitch Leary be the worst dad in the history of fucking dads. Oh my God. All right. Back to the script. Isaac had experienced a lot of trauma, and I felt he could relate to Allison on a level deeper than Scott ever could. I believe she responded to that. Allison, Chris, and Isaac made a great team, and the show would often feature them in that way, almost as a new family unit, especially for the Argents who are in desperate need of rebuilding a shared concept of family, something I believe they found with the inclusion of Isaac, with the intimate involvement of his character. Isaac's intimate involvement with the Argents didn't only help Allison recover from her secret pain, but he also helped Chris in more subtle ways. If teen angst transformed Allison into a weapon, then the love of both her father and Isaac transformed her once more into something more tender and human, but not less dangerous or sharpened. In the eternal words of Miss Morrell, she maintained balance. Growing up without dying inside is all about maintaining balance. Allison's arc was truly deep. I was shocked when she died, but like all great tragedies, it felt like the correct choice. the right decision in a way. I felt it like a punch to the gut, too. It also marked the completion of the portrait Teen Wolf had spent such a long time creating of Allison. It was a sketch of a breathtaking young woman who faced the horrors of teen angst head-on and came out the other side a hero. She died a hero's death. Of werewolves and banshees, of full moons and silver arrowheads, I've been hung up on Allison Argent.